Marine Le Pen is making her third attempt at becoming France's next president. The polls suggest the race could be close. Could this be the far-right's best chance in the race for the Elysee Palace? But she isn't alone in courting the far-right vote. What's behind France's fascination with far-right candidates? Welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. The two themes dominating the far right in the run-up to the elections include the fear of a foreign invasion by immigrants and the so-called enemy within France, which has been imposed on the Muslim community.
Foreigners who come into our country will have to sustain themselves. A foreigner who comes into our country will not take advantage of our hospitality and will respect the French, our traditions, our way of life, our laws.
Un étranger.
A foreigner, my dear friends, who misbehaves will go back home.
Le Pen is appealing to blue-collar voters who feel let down by the elite. But she's been fighting a split within her own party, and her niece has joined forces with her rival, Eric Zamor. He's the new poster boy for the far right, who wants to save France. He's been campaigning on hardline views on immigration, Islam and national identity.
There is a problem with the spread of Islam nowadays in France. There is a problem because politicians have stepped back, because they have wanted France to make reasonable compromises with Islam instead of asking Muslims to make reasonable compromises with France.
How strong is the far-right political movement in France, and what is stopping them from winning? So let me introduce today's guests. In the studio with me, Joseph Downing, Senior Lecturer in International Relations at Aston University and expert in French politics. In Paris, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, journalist and political commentator. And in Saint-Malo in France, Jacques Crellon, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. A warm welcome to all my guests. Joseph, let me start with you. At the moment, Macron isn't overly struggling against the far right, but Le Pen has narrowed the lead and could do so further.
Definitely, yep. And I mean, this is the unfortunate reality of this election again, is we're confronted with this possible runoff between a far-right candidate and someone on the centre. And I think Macron has suffered somewhat for having quite a lacklustre campaign for re-election so far. I mean, it's kind of almost been a non-campaign, right, in many ways. And his initial war bounce, where he tried to project French power onto the global stage by meeting with Putin and keeping lines of dialogue open, I think has floundered somewhat given the lack of any progress in his negotiations with Putin. So I think
because he did see a surge in popularity because of how he'd handled Ukraine, Russia. But you don't think that that's continuing through?
I doubt it. Given as more and more atrocities emerge, it has actually made his approach a bit naive compared to other more hawkish leaders and states across Europe, like the UK and Poland, for example, who were very much, we don't negotiate, we supply weapons and we try and win the war.
Joseph, thank you. Anne-Elisabeth, just how strong is the far-right movement in France, and who are Le Pen and Zamor appealing to?
They appeal to very different people, actually. And if they were not such enemies, I think actually they would be very complementary. Eric Zemmour is a newcomer. He's a journalist. He was, until recently, a polemicist at Le Figaro. He appeals to men. He appeals to higher income and more educated people. He appeals to urbanites and the Southeast. And Marine Le Pen is on her third run. She appeals to women. She appeals to the Rust Belt. She appeals to people who feel that they've been left behind. Her voters are much more like Trump voters or Brexit voters. And so they each cater to one side of the French population that actually feels that nobody so far has been ruling France the way they thinks of them.
Jacques, do you agree that French politics has seen a big move to the right in recent years? And do you think that's enough to give Le Pen a real chance?
Yes, indeed. French politics have moved very much to the right. Now you have about 33% of people who say they're on the right, 36% who say they're in the center, and only 16% who claim they're on the left. So that has helped, in a way, definitely Marine Le Pen to gain some credibility. But I want to go back to the fact that the war, yes, the momentum, Le Pen and Zamor declared they were very friendly with Putin, but the impact of the war on the French has changed in the last few weeks. People are no longer worried about the Third World War and the role of Macron in maybe achieving peace. They are more worried about the impact of the war on their purchasing power, on the cost of living. And that has been the strong point of Marine Le Pen. She's been campaigning for quite a while on the issue of the cost of living and purchasing power. And therefore, at the same time, she's made a campaign with no big meetings, but staying very close to the people, going all over France in a bus and having a near-side campaign. Also, she's completely changed her image. Before, she was fairly conflictual, aggressive. Now she's all cuddly and soft. And to the point that now 46% of the French people think she is very close to them. It was 22% in 2017. And a calmer attitude, less aggressive attitude, has led also to a rise in her credibility. In 2017, only 21% of people thought she has what it takes to be a president. Today, that figure has jumped to 39%. She's been in part helped by the radicality of Eric Zemmour, whose extreme proposals, lack of empathy for Ukrainian refugees, very radical positions, has made her appear kind of a more centrist, a calmer, a more middle of the road politician.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That she's almost rebranded herself in a way to appear more palatable.
She has succeeded in de-demonizing herself. Now she's looked upon by people as the woman next door who's going to look after your pets when you're away. She has projected a nice image, and in doing that, she has swept under the carpet a lot of more radical proposals. Up to now, there's not been any real debate between her and opponents. She's avoided debates. Tonight, there's a debate on French television. She doesn't want to take part in it. So she appears as more middle of the road, but her program is very hard right, still hard right. So I would say that she's wolf in sheep's clothing, and hoping that maybe she can pull the wool over the eyes of people for a bit longer.
A wolf in sheep's clothing. Let's just take a closer look at Marine Le Pen. Obviously anti-immigration, a nationalist, but as Jacques says, lately she has focused on increasing people's purchasing power and fighting inflation. Here's what she had to say on the campaign trail.
Don't seek to put me in a box, because I don't fit in any mould. I'm a patriot, and I do what's necessary for the French people to be prosperous, to be safe, to be happy and confident about the future. And this is through the preservation of national sovereignty, because all the crises that took place showed that there were enormous gaps, weakness in our sovereignty.
So, Joseph, Le Pen is now focusing more on French families, on purchasing power, on social welfare. Is that, as Jacques says, making her more palatable? Is she rebranding her image?
So something that's quite interesting about this campaign, both her and Macron have Macron has tried to walk back many of his pro-globalization, pro-internationalization of business and industry comments of the past. And this really, and her focus on this historically really does play into the current situation when we're talking about things like a rise in the cost of living, issues with imports of food from places like Ukraine, issues of cutting economic ties with Russia, something that France is, and like the UK, is quite exposed to in terms of our economic ties with Russia. It definitely gives her more credibility because she has not just reached out to voters on that issue now, but she has the historic record of being a campaigner on those issues for quite some time. So, you know, while liberal Europe was concerned with trying to bring Russia into the fold through increased enmeshment, increased trade between the EU and Russia, she's always been very much, no, we need to put France first. We need to be more self-sufficient.
But she has said in the past that she admires Vladimir Putin, which is clearly a very unpopular sentiment today.
Totally. But as your guests have said, I think concerns around the war in France have shifted, right? So there are concerns about maybe remarks she made about Putin, but people's real concern now is the possibility of near double-digit inflation, the reduction of purchasing power, and that more general daily chaos. You know, people are talking about the rise in the price of wheat and stuff like that. I mean, you know, I think this is
these are things that impact directly on people's lives. And Elizabeth, do you agree that Marine Le Pen is? I don't know whether I'd go as far as to say that she's making herself look cuddly, but she is making herself look more palatable, more centrist to candidates like Eric Zamor, and in a way that's dangerous because she still has those far-right policies.
I think, yes, she has succeeded. And earlier on, we were discussing this and you said the word cuddly. She has absolutely made herself in many ways cuddly. And you're going to be interested to know that when you ask those in those studies where they say define a public figure with just one word, what comes up most often for her is cats. And the reason is that she's got 6 cats. She has a breeder's license for Bengals because she wants to be able to mate her cats. She has said to journalists that sometimes being at home with her cats makes up for the hardness of politics, and people relate to that. She has, strangely enough, it's very sincere, and I think people feel the sincerity. She has also, in her rallies, which were much more intimate, much smaller than Eric Zemmour's, and she hasn't tried to have those big mass demonstrations. She has talked in a quiet voice of, you know, the hardness of politics. She's talked about how she suffered to see her niece, Marion Maréchal, who left the National Front to join the National Rally to join Eric Zemmour. And she has partly, I think, because at 53, it is her character, and of course, partly out of calculation, she's made herself the living embodiment of what she has called in recent years the detoxification of her party. She wanted to have a party that was more to the center, as much to the center as you can be when you're the National Rally, and that now the person matches the policies.
Jacques, is it concerning that a candidate, a far-right candidate, can make themselves look, as Elizabeth says, cuddly, that they are appealing to a section of the population, but they still have these very nationalist, very hardline views?
Yes, indeed. Well, at least to people like me, it might be very pleasant for her supporters that she's managed to hide a hard edge behind a soft, cat-loving edge, maybe. But at the same time, also, I don't think she's been very challenged by the media up to now. They tend to gloss over the aspects, the more salient aspects of her program. It's never mentioned. They always talk about influence on cost of living, but they never talk about. They seem to believe that she no longer wants to leave Europe, for example. She says she won't leave Europe. Like in 2007, she wanted to give up on the euro and maybe withdraw from Europe, or she was talking about. Today, she wants to stay in Europe, but the policies mean that France would breach. She claimed that she wants to breach some of the European laws and some of the European treaties. She wants to.
You say she's not being challenged by the media. Why not? Why is she not being challenged on these views by the media?
it's difficult to say. At least there's one channel who is campaigning for her and her films. We see in France, we have a channel called CNews, owned by Bolloré, where Zemmour used to work. And for example, in the last few days, I realized that this channel was highlighting topics on law and order. Like today, they're all only talking about the death of a young Jewish boy who apparently was hit by a tram, but apparently after a fight with some people which are presumed to be probably of Arab descent. That's probably the implication. And law and order, it's an issue which has been also very strong for the French. And the three I's, identity, immigration, Islam, still remain at the core of the party. She says she's not against Islam. She even accepted to take a selfie with a young woman wearing a headscarf. But if she comes to power, there will be a referendum. She will change some of the basic laws and fundamental rights of the French constitution. And she will prevent the wearing of headscarf, not only in school, but in the street, in all public offices, in transport.
So you're basically saying that she's presenting one image, but if she ever were to take power, then obviously her true colours would come to light. That's what you're saying. Look, let's have a look at Eric Zamor. We've talked about him a little bit up to now. He's a TV pundit. He's been convicted and fined for hate speech. Here's what he had to say about his rivals.
Regardez-les.
Look at them.
Valérie Pécresse est une centriste.
Valérie Pécresse is a centrist.
C'est une centriste.
She is a centrist who is already ready to vote for Emmanuel Macron. Marine Le Pen is a socialist in economics who no longer wants to take any risk of displeasing the media on sovereign matters. As for Emmanuel Macron, he has spent 10 years in power since François Hollande, and he still does not know which side he is on.
Joseph, the interesting thing about Zamor, I mean, he has very far hardline right views and makes no effort to hide that at all. But there was one point in time where he was being talked about as possibly going through to the second round.
Yeah. He enjoyed a couple of weeks where he was riding really high in the polls, and then he just seemed to completely drop off. It's one of the very interesting things about this election campaign, and I think one can overstate and overestimate the appetite in France for extremism. I don't think most French people are xenophobic to that extent, preoccupied with identity to that extent. I think people's concerns are much more akin to most electorates in democracies. Yeah, they care about the nation, they care about a bit about identity, but they are more focused in on things like inflation, the economy, reform.
But one of the accusations that is levelled against far-right candidates is that they play on people's fears. They play the fear card. And one of the things that Zamor peddles very heavily is this idea, this great replacement theory, the so-called replacement theory, where white Europeans are being replaced by non-white migrants. Clearly, that is something that does strike a chord with a section of the French public. And in France in particular, that notion seems to have gained traction.
Yes, but it's also been covered extensively in the media, who do point to studies that have been done to show, A, France has one of the highest fertility rates in Europe more generally, and B, that the fertility rates for non-white French people come in line with those of the white French population within a generation, right? So this idea, the projections that show, generations of Muslim women will continue to have 5 or 6 children per woman are clearly false, right? But it does play into one of the weaknesses of the French system, is that the numbers in politics are not known. So you cannot actually tell with any certainty how many people who are black, Arab, Muslim, Jewish there actually are in France, right? So he's done that. He's played that sleight of hand of stoking again that anxiety about numbers. But again, I don't think it concerns people in the immediate term enough for them to go for such an untrustworthy radical candidate.
And Eric Zamor on the current figures is not likely to go through to the second round. So, Anne-Elizabeth, here's a question for you. If as it looks at the moment, it's going to be Marine Le Pen going through to the second round, who are Zamor's supporters going to vote for? Are they going to give their votes to Le Pen?
Actually, that's a really interesting question because at least 1/3 of Zemmour's voters will vote for Emmanuel Macron in the second round rather than voting for Marine Le Pen. And that's because he has gathered a coalition that's vastly different from hers. He's got many Républicain voters who did not like their candidate Valérie Pécresse because they thought she was inauthentic and she was soft. And she tried to overdo the hard style, and then it just looked like something that she was disguising herself as, and not really her sincerity. But they also do not like Marine Le Pen because they think that Marine Le Pen is looking backwards, that she doesn't have a real project, and that she doesn't have a team to govern France. Whereas what Zemmour has been advocating in all his rallies, and he's looking beyond the presidential election to the legislative election that we're going to have in a month's time, and it's what he calls l'union des droites, the union of the right, and that means he wants to shave off as many people from the Républicain, the centre-left, as possible. That would be about 1/3 of people who prefer his hardline. He wants to bring many of the voters of the Front National, and he was the National Rally, as it's called now. And what he wants to build is a kind of party that's going to be somewhere between Viktor Orban's Fidesz and de Gaulle's RPF in the 50s. And that's a very interesting construction. They feel that he's not going to be the actual sort of the leader of that party. He's going to be a very important influence, but they feel that they're going to find back some people who've already held public office, such as, for instance, the MP for Nice, Éric Ciotti, and that this would be something that is much more palatable. Imagine a kind of Tory party that includes Nigel Farage, and that's what they would like to vote for.
Don't put that image in my head. Jacques, do you think this second round is going to be a pretty tight race?
I think a new campaign will start after the first round. We'll see how close Marine Le Pen will be to Emmanuel Macron. And it will be very interesting to see that this time she will be more challenged. There will be a debate with Macron. Again, last time, you remember, in 2017, it was a shipwreck for Marine Le Pen, and everyone thought she would never recover from a bad performance in that debate. This time, she seems to be better equipped. But as Anne-Elizabeth said, she will also have to explain herself. She hasn't got a big team around her. And I would agree, I would make the point about Éric Zemmour. Éric Zemmour is not interested in winning this election. Éric Zemmour wants to be the catalyst for a French revolution on the right. He wants to be the one who brings to birth a new party, including the people that Anne-Elizabeth mentions as Éric Ciotti, Vauquier in the Républicain, the people from the National Front, and his own supporters, to create a hard right party which could claim about at least a good third of the votes in France and be present in next election. And he's looking at the parliamentary election, but more importantly at 2027, because everyone has assumed that Macron would win. It's less certain now, but it is still likely. And the big challenge for the right is now the next presidential election. Right. Now that the left has been smashed, they think there's maybe an open boulevard for them in 5 years' time with a new leader, not Emmanuel Zamor, not Zemmour, but it would be not Éric Zemmour. Sorry about that.
You're saying that quite emphatically, and perhaps hopefully. Let's put that to you, Joseph.
Zemmour, but Laurent Wauquiez or Marion Maréchal Le Pen, who could be, who seems to have a certain pulling power over the voters of that camp.
Well, so, I mean, as Jacques says, it is deemed likely by pundits that in the second round, Macron will triumph over Le Pen, as he did back in 2017. But looking ahead to the next elections, 2027, do you see the far right gaining ground?
Well, I mean, when I was asked this question in 2017, I couldn't have foreseen a pandemic and almost a world war breaking out, right? So we really have no clue what's going to happen. between now and 2027. But what is for certain is the right will maintain a significant presence in France. Identity concerns will not go away. Right? Once things settle down with inflation, once things settle down with more global politics, these things will re-emerge, I think, as important in French politics. And a lot will depend on the success of Macron's reform and the kind of, reindustrialization of France type agenda. I mean, these are things that kind of Trump hinted at in the US, but are much more difficult to do than they are to say, right? And he's got a reasonable record on these things, but it'd be interesting to see how things shake out over the next 5 years for him.
Joseph, thank you. Anne-Elizabeth, Jacques, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And thank you for watching at home. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and all the team here, bye-bye. Thanks for watching.